So in the most recent developer live stream for Diablo 4, we got our first look at Season 5. And what I wanted to go over in this video is the new endgame system coming with Season 5 called the Infernal Hordes. Now the Infernal Hordes is a new wave-based activity with some type of survivor or roguelike elements. And I think the best way to go through this is how you actually go about unlocking this new content and then going into it and how it's going to play out. And to start off, this is a permanent addition to the game, so even though it's coming with Season 5, you're also going to be able to play it on Eternal Realms, and it's going to exist after Season 5. But to start off in Infernal Hordes, you're going to unlock a questline once you get into World Tier 3 that's going to bring you to unlocking your first compass. Now a compass is basically your key or your nightmare sigil for this new activity. And these are going to work in a very similar way to nightmare sigils, where they have different tiers, they have different affixes on them. They'll tell you the monster level of everything you're going to be facing in there. They're also going to have a certain amount of revives you can get in that activity. But these different affixes are also going to be a bit different compared to Nightmare Dungeons, because these seem like they're not really going to have negative affixes on them. They're just going to essentially buff up how many waves you can do, how difficult or how high level the enemies in this activity are going to be, and then it's going to buff or change the different rewards you can get at the end of this activity. So for instance, the key they showed was Tier 3, and this can go up to Tier 8. The monster level is going to be level 100 on Tier 3s. The wave cap is going to be wave 5, because as mentioned, this is a wave-based activity, basically a wave-based horde mode. And then on this specific key, there's going to be a bonus chest that has a guaranteed greater affix drop that costs 250 ether. Ether is also going to be the currency you use in this activity, and we'll go over that later in the video. And then there's other affixes on this key that give additional rewards. So there's material chests you can get in this activity, and this will give more of that. There's equipment chests, and this key also gives more legendary items out of that as well. So these compasses are primarily going to give you the information of what you're going to be facing in here, how hard it's going to be, and then it's going to be buffing up the rewards. And there's also going to be an item called Abyssal Scrolls, which is how you upgrade these compasses. And as mentioned, these compasses go up to Tier 8, and the enemy level at Tier 8 is going to be around level 180 to 200. So these are going to get very difficult at the high tiers, but we're not exactly sure how you go about farming more compasses or farming more Abyssal Scrolls. This wasn't specifically detailed. It sounds like you get your first compass doing the quest line, but presumably you'll get more compasses or Infernal Scrolls just doing other activities out in the world. And it's more than likely that you just get more compasses doing other endgame activities, and then you get the Abyssal Scrolls from actually running the Infernal Hordes. But either way, this activity is going to be massively replayable, and it's going to have quite a lot of difficulty at the higher ends. But you've activated your compass, and that's taken you to the Infernal Hordes play area. But how is this activity actually going to play out? And it's actually going to be pretty simple as a concept. It seems like you're just going to be in one decent sized circular room, and it just spawns tons of enemies constantly in this room, and it's legitimately a wave-based horde mode where you're just constantly killing massive amounts of enemies. They specifically mention wanting this to have a very high density and allowing you to get into a flow state where you're basically just killing massive amounts of enemies, constantly doing that gameplay loop of next wave, kill massive amounts of enemies, next wave, kill massive amounts of enemies. But what's going to break this up a little bit is the boons and banes you choose after every single wave. So as mentioned, the first key that they showed at Tier 3 has 5 waves. So you defeat wave 1, and then there'll be these 3 pillars that spawn in the middle of the room, and you choose one of them. All of them have a bane and a boon on them. Now the ones they showed all gave a buff to enemies, or basically a buff to the room you're in, which is a debuff to you. So one of them increased enemy damage, one of them rained down fireballs, kind of like what would happen in Helltides. But all of the pillars they showed gave boons of additional ether. Now ether is the resource you're going to be earning in this activity. Once you complete the activity, you use your ether to open up a bunch of different chests, and you get to choose which chests you want to open up depending on what rewards those chests give. Now one thing I'm kind of confused on is if all of these pillars are just going to be that they buff the enemies or the room you're in, or if there's going to be pillars that actually give you buffs instead of giving you ether, because they did specifically talk about this being a survivor like game. So something like Vampire Survivors or any other survivor game like that, which are very much roguelike games. So you would assume that you would also be able to choose choose from roguelike buffs to your actual character for the rest of that run. And that's the thing I definitely want. I very much hope that every boon you get in here is not just an increase to the ether you're gaining. I hope that you are able to instead choose buffs. I would honestly like this much more if you didn't actually get boons as increased ether, and instead most or all the boons you could choose between were just buffs to you. Because also the developer that was explaining this system also was talking about some of the stuff that they want us to test, because this is going to be on the PTR, and one of the things was, how do you feel about the boons and banes? Now, how he was talking about this, it did sound like some of these boons would be buffs to your character instead of just giving more ether. So now you've gone into the Infernal Hordes and you've defeated the 5 waves. After that, you're going to enter another room, which is where the boss fight takes place. And you're going to have to defeat this boss fight to actually complete the activities for all the chests to spawn, so you can use your aether to open any of these chests. Now, the boss fights are actually going to be pretty interesting because it's going to be all new bosses. And these are going to be the council bosses from Diablo 2. And you're going to be fighting 3 different bosses at a time. And there's going to be 5 total different bosses. And that means that there's going to be 10 total combinations of these bosses. And as you're fighting these bosses, once you kill one, it's going to buff the other 2. And it seems like all of these bosses are all specific to a different element, because we saw like one of the bosses was Hove Flame and one of the bosses was Hove Shadow. So it seems like all these different bosses are probably going to have their own mechanics. They're probably going to be doing different damage types. And once you kill one, it's going to buff the others. They're going to do more mechanics. They're going to be dealing more damage. So it's going to get harder as the fight goes on. But you also have some control, because you could target one boss that maybe your build is worse against, or maybe does more damage to your specific build. So now you've gone in, you've defeated the boss fight, and now the activity is over and you get to choose your rewards. Depending on how much aether you earned through that run, you'll have a bunch of different chests you can go open for varying aether amounts. Now, one of the big things we did see is, depending on what compass you're using, there will be some unique chest reward within them. Specifically, you could get a greater equipment chest that costs 250 aether that guarantees you greater affix items, and presumably on different compasses there will be different buffed up special chests. So on that compass, the buffed up chest would be the greater equipment chest. Maybe in another chest it would be a greater spoil of gold, because all of the different chests we saw were spoils of equipment, so that would just be like legendary items or other pieces of gear. Spoils of materials, presumably this would be boss materials or herbs or different things like that. There was spoils of gold, which is going to be another really good way to earn a lot of gold. And then there was the spoils of the greater equipment. So this is also going to be an incredibly good activity specifically for the rewards, because you can choose the rewards you want to go for. And as mentioned when going over the compass, there was that one greater chest, but there was also buffs to other chests in there. So one compass may have a buff to materials. So maybe using that compass, you want to go and get the materials chest at the end. One of the affixes could be a buff to gold. So maybe you want to get the spoils of gold at the end. So there's going to be quite a lot of ways to buff up the rewards you're getting from the Infernal Hordes. But on top of those rewards, the Infernal Hordes is also going to have new uniques and legendaries that are tied to this activity in a similar way that a lot of uniques are tied to the endgame boss ladder. Now, this doesn't mean these items can only be obtained here. It just means you go here if you want to target farm those items. And specifically, it's seeming like there's going to be 10 new unique items and 20 new legendaries tied specifically to the Infernal Hordes, that this is where you go to target farm all 10 of those uniques and all 20 of those legendaries, but you can still get all of these items from doing basically any other activity in the game. Now, we didn't get a look at what legendaries are specifically tied to the Infernal Hordes, but we did get a look at 6 different uniques that are tied to the Infernal Hordes. The first being the Basilisk, which is a new staff for the Druid. When you first hit an enemy with an Earth skill, petrify them for 3 seconds. Petrifying an enemy deals some amount of base physical damage, could be pretty good with, say, Pulverize or Landslide builds. We then have the third Blade for the Barbarian. Your weapon mastery skills are now now also core skills that have no cooldown but cost fury, dealing up to 70% of normal damage, and their fury costs are reduced by 5 for each additional charge the skill would have had. So this is probably going to allow for some new builds, turning weapon mastery skills into core skills. Then we have the Mordecrux, a new dagger for the necromancer. When consuming a corpse, there's up to a 30% chance. Also create a skeletal simulacrum that seeks enemies but cannot attack. When it dies, it explodes for some amount of base shadow damage. This effect is also treated as a macabre skill. So now you're just consuming corpses, spawning a bunch of these exploding skeletons that just run around and do big shadow AoE damage. Then we have the Umbercrux, a new dagger for the rogue, and casting a subterfuge skill also spawns a shade totem for up to 8 seconds. Any damage the totem takes is replicated onto surrounding enemies at 30% effectiveness. You may have 2 shade totems out at a time, and their damage counts as traps. Now this one's also pretty interesting because you spawn these totems, and you could spawn 2, so you could have abilities the pierce, hit both totems, and both totems AoE, technically making it pulse 60% of the damage because you're hitting both at the same time. This is also really cool because you could have some crazy high damaging single target attacks that are now AoE damage. So there's going to be some crazy potential with this. There's also probably going to be some bug skills with this. Then we have Vox Omnium, which is a new staff for the sorcerer. Casting a core skill additionally fires 2 instances of Firebolt, Frostbolt, or Spark, matching the elements of your last 2 non-core skill casts. These projectiles deal up to 90% increased multiplicative damage. So basically, casting a core skill casts different basic skills. Now what's pretty interesting about this is depending on the last skills you cast that weren't core skills, it determines the element of that basic skill. So you could potentially mix elements. So you could add in a fire basic skill on a lightning build that now could apply fire effects that could synergize with other effects through your Paragon boards or through your skill trees. And then finally, we got a non-class specific unique, which are new unique boots. And when you cast a skill with a cooldown, you explode for some amount of a base fire damage. So this base fire damage is decent, but this also does kind of seem to be more focused around a sorcerer because it's based on cooldown skills, which sorcerer uses most of, and it's fire damage, and one of the rolls on this is non-physical damage. So something like a poison landslide druid build wouldn't be as good with this because of the non-physical damage and because a sorcerer could also buff up the fire damage. But for some builds that have all cooldown abilities, these might actually be good. But that's pretty much all the information we have on the new Infernal Hordes endgame activity. And again, this is a permanent addition to the game, and this is honestly a more substantial addition that I figured we would be getting, because if you don't know, season 5 is only going to be 2 months, because after that 2 months we get the first expansion, Vessel of Hatred, and we get season 6. So getting a pretty substantial new endgame piece of content is actually a pretty big deal. And also it was teased that this is not the only thing coming with season 5. They just want testing with this because it seems that this is the new permanent addition to the game with season 5, but it seems like there's still going to be some more season 5 specific content. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the Infernal Hordes. The main thing I want to know about is if those boons and banes are going to be giving us buffs to our actual character to buff us up through the rest of that run. That's really what I'm most interested in. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.